Welcome to everyone. Who's been at the previous two programs? Do we have any repeat offenders? Yay! Excellent. Well, glad you joined us for this final program. This has been a 3-part series. I'm sorry that you guys missed the first 2 parts, but maybe we can convince Carla and Michael to do this again later on. The third part in this series on downtown Cary streets and the history and all of that fun stuff. So today you're going to learn about kind of beyond downtown Cary streets. We would like to thank the Friends of Paige Walker, Carla Michaels, wave. Thank you so much. And Michael Ruse, wave. Yeah, you're gonna see him all program long, it's cool. But thank you so much, you two, for helping us plan and develop and present this program. You guys are presenting. I'm done here. So I will turn it over to you, Michael.
All right, thank you very much.
Yes, and I'm gonna hit the lights back there.
Judy?
Somewhere. Oh, your head was hiding them. That's fantastic. I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm gonna shut the door.
Before you go on, I'll take a picture by wave. All right, thank you. As Aaron mentioned, I am Michael Rivers. Thank you so much for coming to spend your time with me on Sunday afternoon. Today we're going to talk a lot about some of the streets in Cary, and it's not necessarily streets that are away from downtown. Some of them are in downtown as well. As Aaron mentioned, this is the third part of a 3-part History from the Streets series. If you missed Carla Michaels' original talk on the oldest streets in town, or the dual presentation that she and Barb did on the African American and people of color's streets, they have been recorded, and hopefully they'll soon be available on the Friends YouTube site. And they're absolutely worth watching. They're very, very good. And as Aaron also said, many thanks to the Cary Regional Library for making this series possible. And likewise, I'm forever grateful to the Friends of Paige Walker and the work they do to keep Cary's history alive, and I'm honored to be a part of that group. Finally, as some of you in this room know, I am by no means a professional historian. Nowhere on my curriculum vitae does it say historian. I've tried to be as accurate as I can be, but if I say something that you know is wrong at the end of the talk, don't hesitate to let me know. History is an ever-evolving story, and even an event like this where I'm presenting, there's always a chance that I'll learn something that I didn't know before. As I mentioned, Carla gave a talk earlier about the earliest streets in town, and it was really, really good, and in no way could I possibly improve upon that, but I will try to give a 50,000-foot little 30-second overview. Now, one of the earliest settlers to come to Cary was a fellow named John Bradford. Around 1795, he set up a roadside inn, at the time what was called an ordinary, which is basically like a little overnight stay, a place to sleep, a place to eat. And this was along the stage road from Raleigh to All Points West. That building was eventually purchased by a guy named Frank Page, the town founder, who built his home attached to it. That building pretty much sat where Town Hall is today. So we go over to that part of town where Town Hall, that's where John Bradford's ordinary was. You can see it on the map. That AF Page is where the Bradford's ordinary was. You can follow the existing roads at that time out toward the Nancy Jones house, which still exists, out on Highway 54, Chapel Hill Road as you're heading west. If you're heading east toward Raleigh, there is Ephesus Church on Chatham Street and Asbury Station Church. Ephesus Church still stands. The, I guess mentioned the Nancy Jones house still stands. In 1854, Frank came to town and bought about 300 acres of land centered around what was then Bradford's Ordinary. Frank at heart was a lumberman, and he understood that they just laid this railroad in 1854 through this area. He can set up a sawmill and start harvesting all this lumber, and having his town and sawmill next to a railroad is certainly a good plan. And as he laid out the town, he also laid out a lot of the roads. Some of the roads that Carla talked about were things like Academy Street, Chatham Street, Railroad, which is now Cedar Street, Walker Street, some of those that are centered right in the downtown area. But let's jump forward about 70 years into the modern area. This is roughly Cary in 2024. I'll talk a lot about the Maynard Loop, which is, everyone knows the loop is outside of Maynard. The only street on this we will not talk about is Chatham, because Carla has already covered that. I'll reference this map a lot during the presentation to show this is where the street is we're talking about. The red star in the middle is where you're sitting right now, at the Cary Regional Library. So you kind of reference yourself based on that. You've got Kildare Farm Road heading due south, Harrison Road heading north, Chatham Street across the middle, Walnut heading out toward the corner. We'll also talk about some of the lesser known streets in town like Byram and Dowell, the streets in the Russell Hills neighborhood. I mean, there are thousands thousands of streets in Cary. This is going to be just a very small subset of that. So let's jump right in to Walnut Street. For most of the street views, what I'll do is I'll show you a map where the street is, and then a view just in case. Like Walnut Street, everybody knows about Walnut Street, but this is just a view. Some of the lesser known streets, it might be kind of nice to have a visual of where they are. This picture, of course, was me standing in the middle of Walnut Street, looking up toward the Cary Arts Center, standing in Walker Street at that point. Walnut is actually one of the older streets on the list, and has actually had a few names over the years. On a 1923 map of Cary, it was called White Plains Road. And that is because it ran to and through the White Plains plantation, which was owned by a fellow named Nathaniel Jones. It was called White Plains because he had about 10,000 acres under cotton. So if you can imagine just standing there almost to the horizon, just a white sea of cotton in the fall when it's harvest time. In the 1930s, Luther Maynard, we're going to talk more about Luther Maynard later, but he had a house on Walnut Street that sat about where the State Employees Credit Union sits now, next to Dad Dunham Park. At that time, the road was called Ramcat, according to the 1930 census. On a 1957 map, it was actually labeled as Cary Macedonia Road. But even more fun, even earlier, in 1939, a Cary Town Council meeting referred to it as Walnut Street. So that section, however, was the part very much up close to downtown. So even as today, you'll drive down the road, you've not turned to change, but the road has changed names. That kind of thing was still happening then, 100 years ago, when it was Walnut Street into Ramcat into Cary Macedonia. The name Walnut actually doesn't directly come from a walnut tree, but rather Walnut Creek, which has its headwaters over between Fenton area and the Cary Town, what was Cary Village Mall. And that Walnut Creek runs parallel to Walnut Street until it gets down to the crossroads area, and then they diverge. So indirectly named for a walnut tree, so I'm assuming this is Walnut Creek was named after. Yeah, that's the same one, because if you follow the map, Walnut Creek will actually run all the way out there. In fact, if you're a biker, you can pick up greenways, and you can bike all the way out to the amphitheater without having to hit the roads. So who's heard of Bree Street? Because it was a street at one time, but this is one of the streets we'll also talk about today that's no longer a street. You see, it's just this little northern terminus of Walnut Street. That's a view of me standing there looking down. Cary Elementary is on the right. What was the Breeze House on the left. I'm looking down south. This is actually the first street on our tour today that no longer exists. It was named for the Breeze family, whose house sat on the corner of Walnut and Kildare Farm Road until a few years ago. But well into the 1960s, that section was still called Breeze Street. Let's take a closer look. It was actually named for John Breeze, the owner of the house. One of his daughters was a lady named Sally Breeze, who actually did graduate Cary High School, went to the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music, and then returned to teach piano at her alma mater. This is a picture of her from the 1929 yearbook. And this is a picture of the Breeze house. So Breeze Street would have run right along the front there. As the girls' 1920 basketball team. Nice picture. The house was built circa 1870 and was torn down about 2 years ago to make room for Lee and Associates property management. Yeah, it's literally like right there. Yeah. But that leads us nicely into Kildare Farm Road. I'm sure that everybody here knows that Kildare Farm was actually a farm. At one point there really was a dairy farm down Kildare Farm Road that existed about where Trader Joe's in that area is. This view is looking south at the intersection with Cornwall. The new Glen Air expansion is visible on the right. Let's take a closer look. So, Kildare Farm was a 1,000-acre dairy farm run by the Kildare family. They had hundreds of head of beef cattle as well as the dairy cattle, and around 30,000 chickens a year. The Kildare family also owned the Pine State Creamery. So if you were like me growing up here in the 70s and drinking Pine State milk in school, all of that was coming just from down the road at the Kildare Farm. Kildare Farm Road first was an unnamed dirt road that led south, sometimes called Holly Springs Road because it led to Holly Springs. But by 1962, we see it labeled as Kildare Farm Road on maps. In the 1960s, it was paved as the subdivisions of Kildare Farms and McGregor Downs were being developed. Now, I had heard that in the 1970s, plans were drawn up to convert the barn into a restaurant a la like Angus Barn style, but the cost proved to be prohibitive, and so they didn't do it. Now, I've also several times heard this rumor, and would love to get this confirmed, that when they were developing the land, several of those small barns were disassembled, moved, and reconstructed somewhere in that South Cary area, and I would love to know if they're still there. Let's move back up Kildare Farm a little bit to Byram Street. It was located near the northern end of Kildare Farm Road. The street was named for the Byram family who lived north of Raleigh, but has the Cary connection. This picture obviously was not taken very recently. It's in the wintertime, and that building where it was the Montessori school is no longer there. But the early 1920s, a fellow named Emmanuel Jethro Byram moved to Cary, and his house was on the southwest corner of Kildare Farm and Byram Road, where the Montessori school sat until quite recently. He quickly became very active in Cary citizenship, serving as a volunteer fireman and on the school board. This picture is him from the 1920s Cary High School. He was a farmer and a lumberman and a partner in the Byram and Sorrell Lumber Company. I'm sure if you've heard of the Sorrell name around Cary. His wife Zelma died in 1929, and like a lot of businesses in the early 30s, he went into bankruptcy in 1933. About that same time, he moved to the coast, got a job working with the Civilian Conservation Corps, working to plant sea oats to help erosion. And wind-blown sand and that kind of stuff. If you don't know what the Civilian Conservation Corps is, it was a New Deal organization set up to give men, unmarried men, from 18 to 35, the chance to get a job and get put to work. If you've walked through Umstead was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps. If you go out to Camp Lafayette, the main camp out there, that's actually on the National Register of Historic Places, and something that was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps. Like I say, he moved to the coast and spent his time planting sea oats to help with erosion. I love this picture of him with his co-workers and a very happy beach dog. He died in 1963, and as far as we know, never returned to Cary. He's not buried here, but it's kind of nice to know that somebody at the street named after Cary also had a good impact on the coast. Just across the street, a little further south, is Kildare Farm Road. I'm sorry, around Kildare Farm. This is Dowell Street, named after local minister George Dowell. It's actually a little bit of a hook road. This picture is from the intersection there with Meadow, looking down toward the corner. The Reverend George Dowell was born in Snow Hill, North Carolina around 1848, but had moved to Cary by 1880 when he married a woman named Tranquilla Yates, a Cary resident. She was of the same Yates family as Eli, Carlos, Aldous Ferris, Yates Mill, and Raleigh, that Yates family. She had actually lived on a farm just north of Cary, around Remainder crosses Harrison. We saw the Yates farm on the map earlier. The Reverend George, like many ministers of the day, traveled to wherever he was called. He was a traveling minister with a home base sometime here in Cary. He preached for a while at Ephesus Church. We saw that out on Chatham, where you're heading out of town. And it's not unlikely that he also preached an occasional sermon at Cary First Baptist. Over the course of his long ministry, he is said to have baptized over 4,200 people into the Baptist faith. A very busy man. His parents instilled in him a great love of education that he instilled in his children. 3 of his children born in Cary are worth mentioning. Aldous Yates Dowell, who graduated Wake Forest University, moved to D.C. and started the Dowell Patent Law Firm, and the Dowell and Dowell Law Firm still exists. His daughter, Patricia Simmons Dowell, was the first student accepted at East Carolina Teachers Technical College, which eventually became East Carolina University, and was also the first person to get a degree from East Carolina University. She eventually became Dr. Dowell with her PhD and taught at Mississippi State University for many, many years. There's actually a road in ECU named Dowell Way, so the Dowell family has 2 roads named after them. But his son, Sprite Dowell, might take the cake. He was born in Cary, president of Alabama Polytech Institute in 1920, which you may know or may not know, became Auburn University. When Dr. Dowell was hired in 1920, Auburn had a nationally ranked football team. Dr. Dowell believed that academics were more important than sports, and he funneled money away from the sports program to the academic programs. And the football team predictably suffered. It lasted about 8 years when they fired him, and we still need a stronger football team. He went on to become president of Mercer College in Macon, Georgia, for the rest of his life. But even then, in the 1920s, football was king in the South. The family portrait is interesting because we have George Dowell in the center, his son, George Jr., which looks a lot like him. The older lady is his wife, Tranquilla Yates, daughter of Aldous Yates. Their daughter is Rosina Dowell, who married the fella behind her, who is Rufus Theodore Coburn. So there's a nice mix there. Rufus Theodore Coburn owned the Page Walker Hotel here in town from 1928 to 1941. So there's a nice tie-in there. And in fact, they love the family names. The lady in the front there with a nice hairdo is actually Tranquilla Yates Dowell, their granddaughter. And just for a little fun connection, the little girl in the front that looks a tremendous amount like my sister is my grandmother, Rosina.
That's why he knows so much about the family.
Got that Jewish forehead going strong there. So the Reverend George died in 28. So I'm thinking my grandmother was born in 16. This is 1925-ish time frame. And I do not know where that picture was taken, unfortunately. One more connection to Cary. This is from the Farmer and Mechanic, October of 1882, and I'll read it for you. A supposed incendiary fire at Cary destroyed the stables, vehicles, and crop of the Reverend George James Dowell, Cary, on Saturday. Loss above $600, which is a considerable amount of money in 1882. Mr. Dowell was absent, filling a church appointment, but his neighbors exerted themselves like Trojans to save the dwelling was ignited at the top. Mr. R.J. Harrison of the wagon factory and future mayor of Cary got a fall from the roof that might have been serious. We don't know if it was serious, but it might have been serious. Now, straight across from Dowell off Kildare Farm Road is Holloman Street. And you'll certainly be excused if you have not heard of Holloman Street because it has not been a street for quite a long time. This picture was taken about 2 weeks ago, so I'm sure you've seen the construction that's going on there. And we'll talk in a minute about what's happening there. But it was named for Charles Johnson Holloman, who had a farm just south of there. Charles lived from 1867 to 1960, sometimes in Johnson County, sometimes in Cary. So, looking at the map, there's Cary Art Center at the top. That's Kildare Farm Road coming south. That's the football field. That's still the playground for the elementary school. There's a road that cuts right across there, and that is Holloman Street. The building there is Cary First Christian Church, was the African-American church that stood there until 1968 when that church moved over onto Evans Road. The road is being converted right now into Higgins Greenway. There's a lovely sign here at the end of Hillcrest that's detailing what went on at the school, at the church and the Cary Colored School that was down there. Eventually, the Greenway will wrap around, cut through there, and come out over on Maynard Road. You can't miss the construction. We don't have a picture of Charles, but in the graduating class of 1914, his daughter Cary is the girl on the far right. She graduated Cary High School in 1914, and then from Greensboro's Women's College, which became University of North Carolina, Greensboro, in 1920. She worked as an elementary school teacher and eventually was a representative to the State Commission for the Blind. She passed away in 2001 at the age of 105. In the category of interesting facts, I found this about Charles Holloman, which is fun to share. That the 12th October 1905 News and Observer story about Charlie Holloman. Yesterday morning, just before daybreak, Mr. Charles Holloman was shot by his father-in-law, Mr. Caleb Penny. The shooting occurred while Mr. Holloman was hitching his horse to a buggy which he intended to go to Garner. He was shot in the right breast beneath the shoulder with a pistol ball passing entirely through his body. Mr. Holloman rushed upon his assailant, disarmed him, and administered with his one arm a severe thrashing with the buggy whip. They clutched several times, and Mr. Holloman, who was a large, able-bodied man, loosened himself and continued the whipping. After having the wound dressed, which was not considered serious, Mr. Holloman went to Garner to meet his man. It was reported here that although living in the same house, Mr. Penny and Mr. Holloman had not spoken in 6 months. The trouble between them is said to have originated in a quarrel at a cotton gin where Mr. Penny became incensed at his son-in-law and Mr. Holloman returned the appropriate epithets with a vigorous person. It is interesting to note that a separate article claims the shot did not penetrate his shoulder, but that it just was a surface wound and the doctor punched it out. But even after the shooting, his daughter lived to 105, Charlie Holloman lived to be 93 years old. If you look at their tombstones over in Hillcrest, there are many family members who were close to 100 years old, so good genetics going on there. Just around the corner from Holloman and the Cary Art Center is Dry Avenue. Dry Avenue was named for longtime Cary High principal Marcus Baxter Dry, not because Cary was a dry town. I've gotten that question many, many times on tours when I mentioned that Cary was founded as a dry town. I'm like, oh, that must be where Dry Avenue is from. That's not actually where Dry Avenue is from. Now, it's hard to overestimate and overstate the importance that Marcus Baxter Dry had to Cary in the first half of the 20th century. I believe we could easily do a full hour talk on his contributions, but instead we're going to kind of narrow this down and try and focus in a little bit. This is Marcus Baxter on the right, Cary High School 1910 at the top, and Cary High School 1920 at the bottom. He was born in 1871 in Union County, North Carolina. He attended Wake Forest College, where he earned his principal of the newly established Wingate High School in Union County, which is now Wingate University, for 12 years before coming to Cary. He was hired as principal of Cary High School in 1908 to replace retiring Professor Middleton, who also has a street named after him. He remained principal until 1942. That's 34 years as principal. When he was hired in 1908, Cary High School was still the wooden structure that you see there. The first brick building was built around 1913. He was a great educator and a pioneer in curriculum development. He understood that students coming out of high school at this time in the early part of the 20th century needed a real-world marketable skill that they could immediately put to use. Some of the notable achievements that he had was starting the Farm Life School here in Cary, teaching kids actual farming techniques. It was the first rural high school gymnasium in the state, and it's hard to remember, but Cary in the 1900s was really much a very rural place. Most of the families in town had farms. There were horses in town. It was a very setting. He also started the Walter Hines Page Vocational Training Building, which we'll see in a minute. In fact, when he was in charge, Cary High School was almost more like a university than a high school. So let's take a closer look at that picture. There. So this is an aerial view of Cary High School in 1950. Dry Avenue is running right along the front. You can see the cars parked out. There's a semicircular driveway. The stone pillars are still there. There's the main building, which is now the Cary Art Center. On the two sides are the girls and boys and girls dormitory, which at the time, Cary High School was no longer a boarding school, and they were used as apartments for teachers and people that worked at the school. There's the Walter Hines Page Vocational Building. There is the agricultural building, the gymnasium, and elementary school. It is interesting to note that the main building, the gymnasium, and there's a little house tucked there in the trees are the only buildings that are still existing. You can see we talked about the Breeze House earlier. This is a nice view of that. Dry Avenue, which is named after him before it was named Dry, was actually called Faculty. The town founders had this vision of the town, and one of those visions was that it was an educational center. And in some ways, they were very forward-thinking, but in other ways, they were very Victorian and very practical. The streets that bordered the railroad, they called Railroad Street. The streets that ran north and south through town, one was North Street, one was South Street. The western boundary of town, you see where this is going, was West Street. The northern boundary was called Boundary Street. So it's not surprising that the street that ran in front of the school was called Faculty. They didn't give it an actual name until much later. So down at the end of Dry, we go into the Russell Hills subdivision. And we're going to talk about several of the streets in there. A fellow named Russell Heater developed the neighborhood, and because you develop the neighborhood, you get to name the streets. So we have streets named after his children, Dorothy, Marjorie, Ann, Robert, street named after his own family, Heater, family friend Griffiths and Union, and Connor Street. We'll talk about all of these in a little bit. Russell first tried to develop the neighborhood in the 1920s, but people felt that one, it was too far out of town, and it's way over there, and there really wasn't any. The town wasn't that big, they didn't need that. Interesting that he actually was first going to call it Page's Park, which I thought was kind of interesting. But then, after the development failed in the 20s, for the next 15 or so years, people would ask him about town. Russell, how are those hills coming along? And I guess after hearing that enough times, he decided to name it Russell Hills instead of Page Park. Let's take a look at Heater Drive, which is the one he named after his family. Russell Orrin Heater was born in West Virginia in 1895, but by 1910, his family had moved to Cary. The advert is from his father, Charles, who ran a well drilling company that Russell eventually overtook and ran himself when Charles retired. By the 1950s, again, the need for developing Russell Hills had come along, so we developed it. It's interesting to note that many teachers at Cary High School lived there because they could buy a house and walk to work. Mayor Bond was one of the mayors that lived in that neighborhood. Russell Heater was a tireless advocate for Cary and development. He earned the nickname Mr. Cary. In fact, as the story goes, he convinced Our State magazine not once but twice to run a story about the town of Cary. In 1947, he drives into Raleigh to the Our State magazine office, gets the editor of the town to come, you're coming with me, gets in the car, drives him to Cary, shows him around, showing him all these wonderful things in Cary, and convinces him to write an article about how great of a place Cary would be. The picture on the left, the magazine on the left, is a centerfold from Our State in 1947. The view is actually, you're standing on what is now Harrison Street, looking up Park Street toward Academy Street is up there. The church parsonages were recently torn down to make room for the parking deck and the expansion of the apartment complex that's going in there. 10 years later, he goes back and says, we need to be seen and heard from again. He goes back to Our State Magazine and convinces them to do a follow-up article. And this one actually is at the corner of Ann Street and Union, and those houses are still there. So again, when you develop the neighborhood, you get to name the streets, and maybe you'll name them after your family. And I will never develop a neighborhood, but I think that could actually be kind of fun. Just name the streets, whatever you want, pick a theme, something like that. It'd be kind of fun. So anyway, now one of the streets is named after his son, Robert Heater. Bob graduated from Cary High School, fought in the Navy during the Korean War, and eventually took over Heater Well Drilling Company and was the third generation Heater to run that company. He was very active and actually president of the National Water Well Association and was a Wake County commissioner for many, many years. Now, during World War II, many of the men, of course, from town were overseas and fighting. So at the age of 12, Robert volunteered to be a volunteer fireman. At age 15, he got his first call and went to answer a call. By 1956, he was actually the fire chief of Cary. When his father was laying out the neighborhood, he was able to pick out a lot. And I think it's always great fun that Robert Heater lived at the corner of Robert and Heater. How many people get that opportunity? Further down Griffith Street is Ann Street. It's named for Barbara Ann Heater, their daughter, and also a Cary High School graduate and a Duke, class of 1955 graduate, who spent her career as an elementary school teacher. She taught here in Cary and Smithfield, and as well for a time in Decatur, Alabama. That's possibly down the street, and that's her graduation picture from Duke in 1955. Another daughter is Marjorie. A little further down from Ann goes Marjorie Street, which we'll see in a minute. Remember, Marjorie's on one side of the park and Dorothy's on the other. This is one on the northern side of the park. She graduated from Cary High School and Flora McDonald College. She worked in D.C. during World War II for the War Production Bonds Department, helping to sell bonds. She married Fred Herring in Cary in 1950 and moved to Dallas, Texas. Her family recounts that she was a lady, a wonderful mother, a phenomenal Southern cook, seamstress, avid reader, and family genealogist. This is her picture here in Cary in 1950 on her wedding day, and then a picture much later in life. And then there's Dorothy. She was also a graduate of Cary High School and Peace College in Raleigh. While her husband was overseas in World War II, she actually worked at Dorothy Dix Hospital, helping in that area. She was a Cub Scout then, and three of her four sons rose to the rank of Eagle Scout, which is pretty impressive. She moved to Goldsboro around 1953, ran a publishing the local shopper's guide, owned Dot's stenography service and Bland Realty, established and managed the C.L. Snipes Ford Truck Car Leasing Incorporation that she ran for 25 years. She was a very busy person. She and her husband moved to Surf City, North Carolina in 1974, where she was a member of the Topsail Island Historical Society, a volunteer at the Missiles and War Museum, and actually founded the Hampstead, North Carolina chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. Go DL. I love the picture at the top. That is in the Heater house on Dry Avenue around 1955, judging by the age of the kids. That's Marjorie on the left and her husband, Fred. That's Dot standing up, clowning with whatever gift she got. And those are her sons, Bill and Tom, they're twins, on the floor on 1955. And I think that's their mom, because at this point, their grandmother had passed. So I think that's her mom, Jess. So we're going to talk about two streets at once, Griffith and Union. This is the view looking down, Griffith's on the top and Union at the bottom. And in fact, if you remember from the map, these two streets run parallel through Russell Hills. Because Russell did not name only streets after his family. He actually named this one after Julian Carl Griffith, who was an employee of Bell South Telephone and helped him clear the land that eventually would become his subdivision. He made, I guess, enough of an impression on Mr. Heater that he named the road after him. But he was born in 1922 in Cary, and during the Second World War, he was a B-27 and B-29 pilot and instructor. So he named, again, Griffith Street, the top one, is named after him. And because Mr. Griffith worked for a union, he named the other street Union. It is not, as I've often been asked, anything to do with the Civil War. It's actually more of a labor union. And it's interesting that J.C.'s brother, J.C., who's called Tom, was a Cary councilman for 16 years in the 60s and 70s, but J.C. himself apparently showed no interest in local politics. Who's heard of Connor Street? I know, actually, a lady in the Carly used to live on Connor Street. Finally, in Russell Hills, then we'll come to Connor Street. And if you're not familiar, that is not surprising, as it no longer exists under that name. It is named for Jessie Muriel Connor, who was Russell Heater's wife. She was born in 1893, attended the Women's College in Greensboro, now UNCG, go Spartans, served in the Navy in World War I. She's a founding member of the Cary American Legion Post and a member of the Cary Gourd Society. And if you're not familiar with the Cary Gourd Society, you may be surprised to know that Cary was once considered the gourd capital of the world. And in fact, on the official seal of the town of Cary in the 1960s, it had gourd capital of the world, little gourds emblazoned on the border. Connor Street was renamed South Harrison in the 70s, but why? The map will help you. Now, this picture from 1978, clearly the farm wasn't there in 1978, but that's the building that is now the farm. It was Winn-Dixie at the time. We see Connor Street coming up, there's Chatham Lawn. I'd love to see the shadow of the ivy elm under the peaks from the roof of the building. And this, of course, Harrison coming down. I love also that Jones Street is still visible, even though it's not there anymore. It's kind of nice to see. So, but if you look at the modern picture, 2024, Harrison clearly intersects with South Harrison, but then it did not. Notice that the Winn-Dixie had a nice, good-sized parking lot, and now it doesn't. They slid the road over to make the two roads connect. And I guess it was too confusing to have Harrison become Connor and then other things down the road. Although now, currently, you can start in Umstead, it's Harrison, it becomes Griffith when it crosses Heater, and Shirley becomes Wicklow when it crosses Maynard, then becomes Blackbird for a little bit. I guess leaving Connor in there was maybe too much. I thought it would be kind of nice to have left it. But it's always interesting to me, I look at these aerial pictures from the 70s and before, and how few trees there were in the downtown area and how much tree growth has been in the last 50 years down there. So this leads us into Harrison Avenue. The view is from the farm is on my left, and I'm looking north up toward Harrison Park. And there is Robert Harrison has a plaque there on the corner. It's named for Robert John Harrison. The plaque sits where his wagon factory once sat. He was born about 5 miles south of Cary in today's Lockmere area, where he served in the late stages of the Confederate Army during the Civil War. And after the war, he ran Harrison Wagon Works, which sat on the corner where Harrison and Chatham, where Fidelity Bank is now. It was one of the largest employers of Wake County, at one time employing over 300 people. And in a town of 500 people, having to run a factory and employ 300 people, well, it was quite good. Looking at the picture, it's hard to know, but that's actually the corner of Academy and Chatham. Before the building that would eventually become Ashworth was there, Bob Harrison had his house on that corner. In his later years, he actually ran a small general store out of that the local kids in the local high school, because remember Cary High School, Cary Academy, is just at the end of the street, they would hang out there. And Bob Harrison was very much a beloved figure in town. They coined the phrase Uncle Bob's Corner, where they hang out at the soda shop after school. The building was demolished in 1931 to build the Mason's Lodge, which then became Adams Drugstore, then became Ashworth's Drugstore, you know, and now we're not sure what it's going to be, because it's not Ashworth's anymore. As mentioned, Bob Harrison started manufacturing and selling high-quality wagons in 1977. But in addition to running Harrison Wagon Works, he was quite an inventor. He invented a domestic bleacher, a steam washer, and a very rudimentary burglar alarm. He also invented and patented the combined seed sowing plow you see on the left. This is a nice picture of him and two other fellows at the Confederate Soldiers' Home in Raleigh. Bob Harrison's on the left at 85 years old. But he also thought about and made the drawings for this system of wireless telegraphy, but found that the cost of making the entrance would be so great that he reluctantly gave up the idea. A publication from 1923 states that, while Mr. Harrison rejoices in the success that has attended the efforts of later inventors, it is a matter of regret with him that he could not perfect his own invention and give the world the benefit of this 20th century wonder a decade before the century dawned. Now, I am from Cary. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Bob Harrison invented the radio here in Cary years before Marconi, but I'm not going to tell you he did. But like many wagon manufacturers, at the start of the automobile age, he ran into a hard time when the wagon factory closed. There wasn't a need for cars. But he continued to serve the town well after the wagon factory closed, where he served as mayor. We saw him as a volunteer fireman, councilman, and justice of the peace. He lived out his final years at the Confederate Soldiers' Home in Raleigh, as I said, and is buried over in Hillcrest Cemetery. Maynard Road. Another major road in Cary is Maynard Road, and as I'm sure most of you know, it's not just a road, it's a loop. Right? It's about 11 miles or so long. This picture was taken up in the northeast corner. I'm looking up toward Harrison Avenue. The Maynard family owned large tracts of land, primarily on the east side of Cary. Pictured here are Luther and his sister Alice, in the top, signing actually a deed granting land, donating land south of Cary in the Macedonia area. Also pictured is George Maynard, Luther and Alice's father. As mentioned, Luther Maynard's large stone house stood where the state employees credit union now stands on Walnut Street. But he had about a 1,200-acre farm in that area where he mostly farmed tobacco, corn, and wheat. But he also ran a sawmill on the present site of Cary High School. In 1957, Luther sold 39 acres to Wake County at the crazy high price of $750 per acre. Some folks in the town could not believe that this county would spend $30,000 for 39 acres of land. So much land the school would never, ever need that. And if you're familiar, that is Cary High School even as it exists today, but it's very hard to see those buildings if you're coming down Walnut Street because so much more has been built in front of it. But the gymnasium on the left and the original buildings are still there. House Road. House Road is actually the fourth road we've talked about today that is not named after a person or a family. We talked about Walnut, Union, and officially Kildare Farm is named after a farm, even though the farm is named after the people. So the Kildare family can kind of fuzz that if you want. But you know, the view is from Maynard, looking west down toward Bond Park. And this to me is one of the neatest roads name-wise in the entire city. Because it's actually named after a high house. Not named after a name of somebody, but is a house that was a high, tall house. The house was built on the high part of ground, and as you can see from the picture, it was literally a tall ceilinged house. There's quite a bit of space between the first row of windows. It was quite an old house. The property was supposedly built by Tignall Jones and later owned by his son, Fanning Jones. Tignall lived from 1720 to 1807. We here in Cary are probably more familiar with his brother, Nathaniel Jones of Crabtree. But it was purported to be a gathering place of sportsmen in the Revolutionary War period. Horse racing, whiskey were plentiful, as were fist fights and shootings. Quite spot. The property eventually passed into the hands of Leander Williams, and the Williams family lived on the property for many, many years. The house was said to have been haunted, but unfortunately no longer exists. It apparently burned down in the 1930s. But since then, it has been the source of haunted tales and legends of buried treasure and whatnot under the house and under the park. Unfortunately, no such treasure has ever been found. However, just down the Greenway from the intersection of Harrison, the Friends of the Page Walker set up a wonderful sign with a QR code you can scan and get all kinds of more information about the house. So our history happened here. Buck Jones. Finally, let's talk about Buck Jones. Buck Jones is named for Alfred Daniel. Buck was his nickname, Jones. Buck Jones Road is really not the central part of Cary. It runs over by South Hills in that area. But the Jones family was so instrumental in the early history of Cary that we had to at least include one road that was named after them in the presentation. They had so much to do with the early settlement of Cary. And Buck Jones, Alfred Daniel, had quite an interesting life for such a short time. He was born in 1857, but only lived 36 short years. He's a grandson of Nathaniel Jones of White Plains. We talked about Nathaniel Jones of White Plains and all of his cotton. Attended University of North Carolina and graduated in 1878 with a law degree. I was a proud state alum. I don't really hold that against him. Became a lawyer with a reputation for forcible oratory skills and was highly sought after as a trial lawyer for his impressive win-loss ratio. Was elected to the North Carolina House of Representatives in 1890, and in 1893, at the tender age of 36, was appointed to the position of Consul General of the United States in Shanghai, China by President Grover Cleveland. Upon arrival in China, however, he became very ill. In hopes that his home soil would help cure him, he started the voyage home in November of 1893, but sadly died on the ocean crossing. He was buried in Cary, and at a time when Cary only had 500 residents, 1,500 people turned up for his funeral. A nice Cary tie-in, his sister Rachel was married to one of the doctors in town, Dr. James Templeton, and they had a son whom they named Alfred Jones. So So we've covered roads in the north, south, east, west, and central part of Cary. But before we go, I lied, this wasn't the last one. Before we go, let's wrap things up with a very brief word about Cary history. Did Frank Page ever meet Samuel Fenton Cary?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Sure.
But you mentioned the Jones family was
Sure.
very influential, and I'm still not sure why they named the street after them.
By the name of Athol, but primarily because he was a consul general to Shanghai, or in China. That was quite an accomplishment, especially for a 36-year-old. He was a North Carolina House of Representatives member. If there's some connection to him in that particular area, I'm not sure. Yeah, that's basically what I got to say.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine, absolutely. So, anyway, did Frank Page meet Samuel Fenton Cary? If you're willing to spend this beautiful Sunday afternoon sitting here listening to me ramble on, you undoubtedly know that Cary was founded by Frank Page and that he named it after Samuel Fenton Cary. You probably also know that Samuel Cary was a United States representative from Ohio, and that his primary connection to Cary was that he was a leader in the temperance movement. And Frank Page, above all of it, hated alcohol and would not allow employees to drink. If you were going to buy land from Frank would ask you, hey, what are you going to do with that land? So I'm going to live on it. You can have a garden? Oh, I'm going to have a garden. You going to grow corn? I might grow corn. What are you going to do with that corn? And Frank, when you're going to build a still, Frank wouldn't sell you the land. He was he wouldn't allow his employees to curse, play dice, was against theater going, against dancing, was very much Victorian. So it's not surprising that Frank would choose to name Cary after a temperance leader. But the question is, did they meet? Around 1855, it was reported that Samuel Fenton Cary did come to Wake County and give a temperance talk in Raleigh. And by this time, Frank was living in Cary, so there's certainly the chance that he could have traveled to Raleigh to hear the talk. But unfortunately, there's no known record for sure that it actually happened in the 19th century. But here in the 21st century, we do know that Frank Page meets Samuel Cary every day. This intersection is over in the Highland Village area off of High House. And I think a little ahead of schedule, but Frank Page meeting Sam Cary is a nice way to wrap things up. So if you have questions, let me know. Thank you very much for coming. So just to jump back on that a little bit, it's hard to really overstate how important the Jones family was to Cary. I mean, the original land grant in the Cary area was to a guy named Francis Jones, that Jones family. His son, Nathaniel Jones, and so much fun, another guy named Nathaniel Jones who's not related to them. Those two Nathaniel Jones owned a large part of Cary. So then were contemporaries and had a lot of interactions back and forth, and of course, because this is how things work, eventually the daughter of one Jones and the son of another Jones marries, and the family get even more complicated and intertwined.
Keep it up with the Joneses.
Keeping up with the Joneses, absolutely. I'm convinced that's where it came from. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I know that the art center was the high school.
Yes.
I also thought that it was the elementary school, but according to your picture was.
Well, that was by when it was started, it was all grades.
Okay.
So up until the time the elementary school was built, yes, all grades went to that school. And I think it was around late 1940s when it finally became a 12-year school. It had been just through 11th grade. But eventually, early, yes, all the grades were there in the school together. So in fact, one of the fun stories is that when the school was first built, it was a 4-room boarding school. And up until the 1927-ish time frame was the last time boarders were actually at the school. But that first couple of years, there weren't dormitories. They were living in whatever houses they could find where people would put them up. When Frank Page was laying out the town, he chose the 4 acres on the highest point in town. Education was very important to Frank, and that's where he built the school. From lumber he milled on that site. So in the earliest days of the school, especially the boys, when they would misbehave, their motivation to behave was go dig a stump out of the yard, because they just cut the trees and left the stump. So those poor high school boys and younger out there with a shovel or axe cleaning up the yard. You have a question? Yes.
Yeah, also on the subject of area school, in that picture you said there were 3 buildings that were remaining. There was a house, there was what's on the art center, and there was a 3rd building.
There's the gymnasium in the back. In fact, if you walk around back of the school, the gymnasium's still there. If you get a chance to go inside, there's banners from the 30s when they were winning state basketball and football championships hanging in there. And it smells like a 90-year-old gymnasium.
Is that used as a gymnasium now for Cary Elementary?
You know, they do use it for some things. I think they have a better gymnasium that they use, but you go in there, there's sports equipment, it's a hardwood floor, and they have events of some kind in there, sure. Yes, sir.
When you started, did you say, going back to the first presentation, that they're making a video of this?
Right, in fact, Nelson, back there, recorded this one. The first two were recorded, and they will be on the Friends of the Page Walker YouTube page eventually. I can't say for sure when. We're not a production company.
Well,
It
a
takes time.
suggestion would be nice, if
Sure.
you have a mailing notice, not you.
Oh, no,
You
yeah.
should send it out to people.
Well,
We
this is
now
my-
have it posted.
This is my chance to plug the Friends of the Page Walker. If you'd like to become a member of the Friends, you can be on that kind of mailing list. We certainly have people in this room right now who can help you accomplish that. Yes, sir.
Yes, two of them.
Oh, okay, oh my God.
You're sitting next to one.
High house structure.
Yes.
You showed approximately where was that?
My understanding is if you're coming up High House, Kroger, which is now Harris Teeter, is on your right, that intersection, it's off to the left down in there. Barb, can you confirm that?
We don't know exactly for sure, but our best guess is it was on that, I guess it would be the southwest corner of that intersection of High House and Northwest Main. So where the Greenway Trail begins, as you're walking down that trail, it would have been over to your right and up. You'll see that there, when you're going down that trail, the land does rise up.
Okay.
And we know that the house sat on top of the hill, so that's our best guess.
So that's very close then to the intersection.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I was thinking it was further out.
No, I think it was quite clear.
Okay. And then the other question has to do with the school we were talking about. Since we have Academy Street, was it originally Cary Academy or was it always a public school?
It was when it was founded in 1870. In fact, it's fun that the school existed before the town. Cary Academy existed as a school a year before Frank Page incorporated the town. So it was Cary Academy private school. As much as Frank believed in education for everyone, especially whether you're black, whether you're white, whether you're a boy, whether you're a woman, it was all people to be educated. It nonetheless still was a private school, so not everyone could afford to go. And it remained Cary Academy until 1896 when a group of citizens in the town bought it and converted it to Cary High School. But it was still private. It did not become a Cary Public High School until 1907, and as a point of pride for those who went there, it was actually the first public high school in North Carolina. When the state legislature was petitioning to make public high schools, Cary High School got their application in before anyone else, and it's my understanding that that application and approval still hangs in the lobby of Cary High School over on Walnut Street.
And that is, so Academy Street, as far as its name is concerned, is based on the private academy. That was
Right,
originally there.
and that's actually why Jim and Ann named Cary Academy, because they're naming it after the original school. Yeah.
Sort of like Building A, another Building A being named.
There you go, exactly. Rick and I worked at SAS together for many years. Yeah, so there you go. Thank you very much. You should have tad late there, buddy. Any other questions? Thank you all so much for coming. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.